Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policy making for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast is Tim Kearns, who was a former special advisor to Peter Robinson. He was also the head of policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have Michael McKernan, who was a former special advisor to the SDLP. He was in the executive from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Good morning, David, and good morning, Tim.
Okay, on the podcast today, we are going to be looking at, is it time to bring in compulsory voting with the recent Australian election? We're also going to be looking at the recent EU-UK summit. What does it mean for Northern Ireland? And then coming up later on the pod, we have an interview with the SDLP leader, Claire Hanna. The SDLP proposed their alternative budget this week to the executive. Do the ideas hold water? And are they a proper alternative to the direction the executive is setting? You can watch it all on YouTube. Search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. Head to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can follow us on X. You can watch clips on TikTok, Instagram, and subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. We also love hearing from you, okay? You can drop us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. We read all your emails. You can WhatsApp us. 0333 404 6507. Make sure you use the word Stormont. We love hearing your comments and critiques about what we're saying. We read them all. And Tim, this leads me very nicely to Adrian's WhatsApp that came in this week. He is asking you, he's got a question for you. If I could put a question to Tim Kearns, a unionist voter once referred to former SDLP politicians such as Eddie McBrides and Seamus Mallon as being the wise old men of nationalism. Does Tim think that this was a sentiment held widely within unionist circles? And does he believe there are any wise heads within nationalism today? Tim, what do you think?
I'm not sure it was a sentiment that was held widely at the time, but I think it's one of those ones in retrospect, yes, because I think when we look across the piece at unionism and nationalism, I think we look back at the politicians of the past. Because of the circumstances I think we were in at the time, we look back at those politicians to have been of a higher calibre and a higher calibre of thought. And I think a higher calibre of wanting to make accommodation than what I think we see our politicians today. Certainly, those SDLP politicians, John Hume, Eddie McGrady, Seamus Mallon, Margaret Ritchie, those people of the past, I think certainly had a lot more gravitas than what we see in the political class today. And I think in retrospect, the answer to that is undoubtedly yes. But I think at the time, you heard all these stories of unionists voting for Joe Henry in West Belfast, Eddie McGrady, whenever there was...
Yeah, but that was to stop Sinn Féin, though, Tim. They're still doing that today.
Whenever there was pressure to stop Sinn Féin, even recently, of course, with Colm Eastwood, when he got his thumping majority, although I think Colm's probably love from the unionist community has completely diminished now, because I think we come to the second part of that question. Are there any wise heads in nationalism today? Very few, if any. There's none, I think.
You don't think me and Michael are wise heads? No.
As I said, in nationalism, there are very few wise heads in nationalism today.
Right back at you, buddy.
As this podcast proves.
Right back at you, buddy. Michael, since two SDLP politicians been referenced there, you obviously would have known Seamus and Eddie. What do you think? I mean, have we lost that within nationalism and unionism? Looks at Tim, the wise heads that were there before?
I think they were exceptional politicians at the time, and it's very generous of Tim not to rule out you and I, David, in all of this.
I think he did, Michael.
But John Humes don't come around very often, and he was exceptional. As I hope to pick up with Claire when she comes on, and I would consider her a wise head and a very strong representative of the current crop of SDLP people. Yeah. But as I hope to mention to her, I think Mallon left a bit of a time bomb behind him, and I'm not sure about the wisdom of that. But there's no doubt that people like Eddie McGrady, Margaret Ritchie had a bit of substance about them, and Breeds Rogers and others, and that's a bit thinner on the ground now. And I include David Trimble and others in that as well.
And Michael's right. It's across the piece. I think unionism is thinner on the ground, but we had different circumstances there.
You were not saying, Tim. You were not saying that about David Trimble when he was the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party.
I didn't mention David Trimble. You're putting words words in my mouth. I think we're thinner across the piece now. But I think you've got to recognise the circumstances. People are killing each other at that point in time, and so people stepped up. John Hume would have been great in whatever he turned his hand to. Seamus Mallon would have been a great headmaster of the school, and probably the greatest in the school's history that he stayed there. And the same for all of these people, Peter Robinson, all of those people on both sides. But because of the troubles that we had, people stepped out from careers and went into politics. We don't see that now. We're not seeing, but maybe Jim Allister is the last person to step out from a great career to actually do something in politics in Northern Ireland, and that's quite sad.
Yeah, I think I always think there's a bit of a rose-tinted view about politics. I mean, yeah, unionists trip over themselves, the law John Hume now. They were not lauding him when he was the leader of the SDLP. They weren't lauding him in the 90s when he was talking to the Shinners. They weren't lauding him in the 80s either when they thought, 1970s, let's not forget, there was a loyalist strike that brought down the government that John Hume was a member of. And
that's what I said at the very start. I think it's in retrospect we see that, but you can only judge what the past was like when you've got the present. And my goodness, if the future is going to be worse than today, God help us. So.
Okay. Adrian, thank you so much for your question and comment. We want all of our listeners to get in touch, and we will pose questions to any of us every week as we go along. So thanks very much for that. Right, into the podcast proper. Okay. The UK-EU reset was underway this week as Kier Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen announced the new deal between the United Kingdom and the UK. Now, again, the rest of the UK has been responding to this. This was being talked about on Hollywood Sources this week as well for the impacts on Scotland. Bit negative there, particularly in the fishing industry, but in Northern Ireland, of course, the dynamic here is incredibly different because, of course, we're viewing everything through the Windsor Framework, stroke protocols, stroke whatever iterations we're on now. Michael, what did you make of the deal that Kier Starmer brought back and the local political reaction?
Yeah, well, I thought it was pretty good. On last week's Stormont Sources, I was given out about Kier Starmer's stupid announcements on immigration. But I feel equally I have to give him some credit for this deal. Now, I should say at the outset that the agreement's not done and dusted, and the devil will be in the detail. But it's an agreement to agree certain things, and they still have to work them out. And it'll also mean that it'll be some time before we actually feel the impact. But what we're having here, I think, overall, is the grown-ups are back in the room. It is ridiculous that the UK should be antagonistic towards the EU and the other way around just because the UK has left. And I think this reset is important to reset the entire relationship. There's also a whole big defence and security element overhanging the deal. It's not just the economics. And I think there are obvious progress on agri-food, on passport queues, on reducing trade friction. The negative bit that's got the headlines, particularly in Scotland, is fishing. But we just have to recognise fishing is less than 0.5% of UK GDP. So whatever's going on in fishing, it's not that big a deal except for the fishermen.
Yeah, and something that really occurred to me, I mean, it's interesting, obviously this is where kind of Northern Ireland's at a bit of a disconnect from the rest of the UK because I'm holding an Irish passport and I know Michael and you, Tim, as well, hold Irish passports. We actually never really had the whole business of queuing at gates going through. We just waved our Irish passports getting off the flight from Belfast, and the half of the plane that didn't have one, you would just smirk at them as you waltz through the EU line.
Feel superior.
Just feel superior. It was just it was a great feeling. I'll miss that when I go to Spain later this year. Tim, what did you? I mean, the unionist reaction I thought was incredibly interesting. The DUP reaction in particular, because they're caught in. They're in the executive, and moving closer to the EU actually domestically helps the DUP politically, but yet they're a pro-Brexit party and they're trying to wrestle with that. What do you make of it?
Yeah, Sam McBride put out an article earlier on the week in the Belfast Telegraph, and people should go and read that. And he really nailed it. Is where's the DUP going to jump on this? Because we know what the TUV is going to be at. These deals are announced, and this deal has followed the same pattern of every single deal that's been announced. There's great fanfare. Oh, this is going to be amazing. This is going to reduce this and clear that and stop this and stop that. Then the deal comes out, and it's bigged up, and as each minute goes past, even within minutes, you start to see that it starts to crumble. It's not quite what people said. It's not going to remove paperwork. It's not going to make things frictionless. It's not going to remove the border. It's the Windsor framework is always going to be there and always going to be subject to future deals that are done. So it starts to unpick very, very quickly. And so that's where the TUV are at. And we saw Jim Allister in Parliament yesterday making those points at Prime Minister's questions. This is not the deal that the government are trying to sell. Now, that's happened every single time. But the DUP are in a very interesting position because the Ulster Unionist Party are, out lauding this. They're saying, this is a good step forward. And the DUP are in that middle position where they oversold the deal, just over a year ago now. And I think they want to be cautious this time, that they see the detail, that they're not going out and being cheerleaders for a deal that may not just quite be what the government are saying. And I think as each day goes by, we're seeing this deal isn't quite what we were told on Monday. So I think the DUP are being right. Just be cautious. Let's sit back. Let's see the detail of the legal text when it comes out. Let's see exactly what's been diminished. Let's see, is it going to be exactly the same for England going to France as it is for England sending goods to Northern Ireland? That's not exactly clear at the moment either. So we need to just see what's going to happen, how it's going to play out. And I think Gavin's playing it right, just being cautious at this time.
And yeah, because the DUP have been burned before, because obviously, actually, believe it or not, it's a year ago today that Rishi Sunak called that snap general election.
I think it's gone beyond all of that. I think that the DUP, if they're striking an outright opposition pose on this, they are flogging a dead horse. I think it's done. I think the outrage about the Northern Ireland being treated differently and all the rest of it, I think the ship has sailed. And even in this settlement, the UK as a whole is putting itself subject to rules over which it has no control or no seat at the table. So the constitutional affront that's highlighted all the time by Jim Allister, the UK has subjected the whole of the UK to such constitutional affront, and I think that just takes it away. I think they're flogging a dead horse. The Ulster Farmers Union have welcomed this. It's over. Move on.
Yeah, but Tim, just on that, because the DUP do have a problem in that, in terms of agri-food and things like that, and agriculture is a big part of the DUP's base. They actually are broadly welcoming the deal. I mean, fishermen obviously aren't as big a part of our economy here as it is across maybe in Scotland and maybe the south of England. So, the DUP are kind of caught there as well, aren't they?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, if you take this as a deal for the UK as a whole, I don't think it's a great deal. I mean, we've sacrificed our fishing waters for you to get into Spain a little bit quicker, David. I mean, it just doesn't seem.
I already was getting into Spain quick, mate. So as for you with your Irish passport,
no, Tim, your children can go interrailing and Erasmus, and young people can move around Europe. Why would you ever have ended that? Why would you not have that?
They could anyway because of Irish passports. But so it doesn't make much change to my kids.
You're welcome. By the way, brought to you by the Irish government that allows Northern citizens with Irish passports to do that. By the way,
well, this is going to make me sound like a really terrible person, but my wife, who's Canadian, I think as we've mentioned before, has a British passport, so she's British and Canadian. And whenever we travel, I zip through and with the glass part where the waiting room is for the plane, I'm looking through that waving as she's still queuing up. So there's a few people commented in the queue behind her that I'm a terrible husband, and maybe I am, but it is quite funny, to be honest. So but that
You're so
aside,
terrible. Imagine having to do that. Imagine starting your holiday that way with your wife, you lunatic. Anyway, come on, the political reaction you.
Well, I think for the UK as a whole, I think it's a bad deal. I don't think it's something that, and I think we're going to see this unpicked, and I think we're going to see this played out.
But Tim, can I just ask you this? Is there such a thing as a good? Because surely anything compared to what the UK had is going to be worse. I mean, this is about mitigating. I mean, Brexit is about mitigating damage. It's not about improving, surely.
The difficulty with Brexit is, and this was always going to be the problem, we've got an EU who won't give an inch, and we've got a British government who, from Theresa May onwards, have been pretty weak in their negotiations on Brexit, and we've now got a Prime Minister in Kier Starmer who again is a weak Prime Minister, and he will do anything to try and give ground to the EU, and that's what we saw in this deal. There's far too much ground has been given to the EU. Look, my view is, and stated very clearly, is we should just rejoin the EU. There's no point in all of this pussyfooting about. We should just go back in, because that's what's going to be better for the United Kingdom as a whole. That's what's going to be better for Northern Ireland. And I agree with Michael on this. There's very little point in Jim Allister yelling in Parliament about Brexit betrayals and paperwork and the acts of union. The reality is Northern Ireland is only going to be an integral part of the UK again, fully, with the acts of union fully restored, whenever we rejoin the EU. And I think unionism should be clear that that's the position that they're taking. But to do that, they have a difficulty. They've got to say Brexit was a mistake. And unfortunately, no unionist, even in the UUP, is brave enough to come forward and say, we made a gargantuan error. We should never have campaigned for Brexit. We should never have been pro-Brexit.
I've always said, Tim, there will be a DUP leader who, it won't be Gavin, but it'll be maybe in 20 years' time, who will come out and say, backing this entire adventure was a mistake.
It can't be done until this current crop of MPs are gone, because they are so embedded. Sammy Wilson is so embedded in the right of the Conservative Party that it can't be done while he's an MP. I mean, he would have to leave the party and become an independent or join the TUV if we were really absolutely honest about Brexit. And that was the problem at the time. If you go back to the Brexit referendum, the DUP's problem was the Brexiteers within the party were the ones who were ruling the policy. And they had embedded themselves so far, so deep into that Tory right that they could do nothing else but support Brexit. It was a disastrous position that the DUP struck at the time. It was a needless position that the DUP struck at the time. And to be the cheerleaders, flag wavers for Brexit has left them open for the last 9 years of simply saying, this is your fault. You did this. You inflicted this pain, and for people to point at them and laugh. Now, here's the flip side of this. For the people who are the cheerleaders of best of both worlds, that hasn't happened. The cheerleaders for the Irish Sea border has delivered no tangible benefit for Northern Ireland. And, on both sides of the divide, people need to come together and say, this Irish Sea border is an absolute and utter barrier to Northern Ireland being economically strong. It is not delivering any tangible benefit. We are not seeing economic growth because of dual access that supposedly exists. So I think, there is an opportunity, once some of those DUP grandees have gone, for the party to reposition itself to a place where we can admit Brexit was a mistake and we can get on with the business of undoing the damage that's been done.
Well. I mean, that'll be one of the interesting things about whether we ever actually get that. But just the final thought on this, I want to ask then about obviously the nationalist implications on this, Michael, because obviously Sinn Féin and the SDLP have been reacting to this too. What do you think about maybe kind of some of the wider debate? Because obviously, conversely, if you're someone in Sinn Féin, it kind of suits to have that kind of economic barrier with Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. You probably wouldn't want the British government moving closer to the EU if you're Sinn Féin. Am I wrong in that line of thought, Michael?
I'm not sure what the Sinn Féin view of that would be. Yes, I mean there is the cheap position that anything that's bad for Northern Ireland separates Northern Ireland from GB and brings it closer to the rules and regulations of the Republic. I guess from a blatant Republican point of view, that's a good thing. But I don't think that's where they are. I mean, the UK, I agree with most of what Tim was saying, but the UK is not going back into Europe anytime soon. So Northern Ireland isn't going back into Europe anytime soon. So what is happening here is they are looking for areas of common ground, and then they're trying to drive through cooperation in those areas. And I don't think there's any big constitutional politics in any of that. I think it's just all practical stuff, and it'll all wash through. Similarly, Tim is right in saying that the benefits of best of both worlds are pretty thin on the ground. We're not seeing very much of that. But who knows, over time, those benefits might begin to show themselves.
Well, we're not hearing very much about rigorous implementation anymore.
No. I think that was a huge mistake by nationalists, the rigorous implementation.
The protocol has been supplanted by the Windsor Framework, Tim, and that the Windsor Framework was only in 2023, so it will take a bit of time for that to eventuate. But look, I'm going to wrap it up there. because I've got to, this is a total captain's call, this next topic. I'm going to completely concede that. But we're going to go down under to Australia. They recently had a federal election. Now, we're not going to do what we did with Canada and peel through results, but Labour won a second term. But I want to talk about compulsory voting because it's something that I have been a big supporter of for a while. The Australian Electoral Commission helped put together the results, and they were talking about a turnout of 90.6%. So 90.6% of people turned up to vote in that election in the middle of the Australian winter. Compulsory voting, lads, come on, back me up here. I mean, our turnout at the last Westminster election was 57%, the worst in the history of Northern Ireland at Westminster elections. Our Assembly election, which we thought was great, was just 63%. Do I have some supporters here for compulsory voting to bring this in? Just for people who don't know the Australian system, if you don't vote without a valid reason, you get fined about $20, which is the equivalent of 16 UK pounds. Come on, back me up here, guys.
Not
okay,
me.
Silence. No, nobody agrees with the words you
Michael,
said.
go on.
Well,
Tell me why I'm
I
wrong.
believe as part of a functioning democracy, people have the right to be indifferent. They have the right to not care a damn. And that means they have the right not to vote. They have the right to ignore elections. And just because people who love working with election numbers would like the numbers to be larger, doesn't mean that that people should have their basic civil right to not bother taken away from them. I mean, it's anti-democratic to force people to vote. Now, I know when they get to the voting booth, they can spoil their ballot paper, or they can do whatever, write something rude on it, or whatever they like. But they shouldn't be forced into that position in the first place. If they want to vote, they'll come out and vote. And we've seen it in Northern Ireland. We have seen Fermanagh, South Tyrone, and all these knife-edge elections where the turnout was in the very high 80s and all the rest of it because people cared about the outcome. If people are only coming out and voting 65%, nothing wrong with that.
Okay, Tim, can I get some? I disagree with Michael on that there. We are compelled to do many things for civic good. I mean, taxes aren't optional. Parking fines are not optional to pay them. There are many things that we're compelled as a society to do. I'm only asking people to go out and cast a ballot every few years. It's not like we're taking them. Not like we're putting them in prison if they don't do it. So,
Why not make them all put national flags on their rooftops?
well,
Same thing.
I mean,
Same kind of
you
thing.
You can
show their commitment to the country.
You can ask. You can get Claire to put that in the next SDLP manifesto.
No, it's
if
just
you want to do
daft.
some
Leave
money.
people alone.
I think this is a ridiculous
Guys,
proposition.
90
So it is.
point. I'll just repeat the turnout figure again. 90.6%.
And what does it matter? What does it matter?
cares?
People have the right to stay at home. People have the right to sit in their backside and watch neighbours are home and away. They don't have to be forced by wee nationalist Dave who wants to get people out and do what he wants to do because he's a North Belfast hard man. So he's used to making people do what he wants them to do. And I'm sorry, it's not going to wash here.
Seriously, by the way, that was such a cliche of 80s Australian soaps. You can tell you were watching that on BBC Two, but to me, I just think in a democracy, surely we want our assembly, the parliament, to be as representative of the public's will as possible. So I'm not sure why, given the fact that again we're all nudged. I wouldn't even say it's being compelled to; it's being nudged. And I'm not talking about putting people in prison or something. Look, the fine would have to be relatively small. Okay, I get that. But at the same time, though, we have nudge behaviours all the time to get people to do civic actions. No?
Look, the reality is...
But you're also unpatriotic. God.
Win them over with your political arguments.
That's right.
Impress them with your political prowess, and they'll come out and vote for you. But leave them
Sunshine,
alone.
lollipops,
Leave them alone.
and-
If they want to go surfing, if they want to go to the opera house, leave them alone.
If people don't want to participate, why would we force them to participate?
I seriously, honestly think that, well, first of all, I think we butchered Australian stereotypes, by the way, to death with surfing, and the Sydney Opera House was even thrown in there too. But I have to say, though, there were skeptics of this when it was brought in about 80 years ago in Australia. They've now been won round. It is now a bipartisan issue. compulsory voting is something that is regarded as a mainstream Australian issue. And look, if it works there, I'm just not sure why it wouldn't work
Well,
here.
if you want to go back in time, we used to deport people to Australia for crimes. And your suggestion is a crime against humanity. Let's deport you to Australia and you can vote to your heart's content and fill out your wee spreadsheets.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, look, the new opposition leader in Australia was actually born in England and moved there. Julia Gillard, born in England, moved there, became the Prime Minister of Australia. So, you know, you can, they had a finance minister from Belgium. He sounded like Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was talking about budgetary issues. So, Matthias Gorman, who stood down in 2020. So, yeah, anyway, but look, I'm sorry the two of you are just completely wrong on this issue and so many others, as I found out over the last 15 weeks.
Leave Kylie Minogue alone. Why should she have to vote?
She does vote, and they vote at the MC. It's a great thing, although people voting with budgie smugglers on is something we should never import here. Anyway, we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. Coming up, we have Claire Hanna, the SDLP leader, talking about the SDLP's alternative budget. Okay, welcome back to Stormont Sources. We have on the podcast, we're delighted to be joined by the SDLP leader and Member of Parliament for South Belfast and Middown, Claire Hanna.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, I think.
Claire, Claire, the SDLP put forward an alternative budget this week, okay? So the 5-point plan for a better budget. And some of the ideas in there are, you're talking about 10% of departmental spending being ring-fenced to match the programme for government, securing the executive control over more tax and spending powers, creating a Northern Ireland Regional Investment Bank. You've also, your final point in there is also about legislating for a Future Generation Act to embed long-term thinking into all government decision-making and spending. So, Claire, in terms of what the SDLP has proposed, I mean, obviously you're not a fan of the way the executive are handling things at the minute in budgetary issues. So what would be the main critique against them from the SDLP's point of view?
Yeah, I think it's important to say, I mean, it's not an alternative budget in the traditional way you get in Dublin or in London, because the opposition is not resourced in that way, and the civil servants aren't, made available to you. But I suppose it is about a different approach. Look, first thing to say, it exists. There is a budget and a programme for government, and that is the first in I think, over a decade. So big tick for that. But it is just existing. We don't get the sense of anything more than what has gone before. I think we're all very aware of the enormous challenges, just the economic environment, the infrastructure pressures, and obviously the funding. There's no disagreement that there's never enough from London, albeit this is, I think, if not the biggest ever, certainly a substantially enhanced budget envelope based further to previous years, but yet it does feel like it's more of the same, and there's not a lot of action on some of the water, for an example, some of the big ticket structural issues that are slowing down growth and public services across the region, across the system, and no real sense of gripping it. And the 10%, you mentioned our proposal to allocate 10% to PFG priorities. That's because, the PFG, a glossy document, a long time in the making. It took a while to get it out there. It doesn't have maybe the ambition. It doesn't mention all the things I would like to see. But it is a plan. It is a start. But yet, if you go through the budget document, just 2% of the budget is allocated to the things in that. A lot of what we're trying to do in opposition is change the culture in the Assembly. Again, we appreciate it's not the same job as in Dublin or London. It's not about throwing out this lot and replacing it with us lot. It's about trying to turn around decades of stop-start failure and a core lack of responsibility, taking and putting out glossy, gauzy documents, but that actually aren't really connected with the budget that you're going to deliver is further disempowering people.
And Claire, one of the proposals that you guys have there is about getting more powers back to the executive. Now there will be, but we've chatted about this in this pod where Tim and Michael, who've actually been there, have said, "Jeepers, more powers back to the executive. Are you mad?" I mean, in terms of, because obviously you're in Westminster and you'd be close to those debates. I mean, how likely do you think that this current Labour government would be to actually really turbocharge devolution in that way?
Well, look, let's start the start. It's not like it's some bonkers idea that we just pulled out on a Friday night. Let's have more powers on top of the ones that we're failing to use. This has been a coherent discussion. Obviously, the Fiscal Commission was asked to look into this, and it at length did a report and published it in 2022 and recommended devolution of a number of levers. The context of this is, as I say, we know we're fairly low down London's priority list. There's a lot of mouths to feed across the UK. There's pressure on every budget. There's never going to be enough, but it's about this, not just cursing the darkness, not just the mean old Brits won't let us do anything. It's about, well, if that's the case, and every party is very good at making critiques of the UK funding model of the UK government, successive governments. Some of them don't allow you, in case of unionism and the alliance, you're not allowed to talk about a long-term solution around that particular funding model. But it's about taking some of that power in your hands. So we're not saying, but if you look at Scotland, for example, they've been pretty ambitious, and they've, with Devo Max, they've taken control of income tax and even increased that. But there are sort of slivers of power. Yesterday, for example, I asked the Secretary of State about the apprenticeship levy. That was in the Fiscal Commission proposal. There's a lot of frustration from some of our biggest employers that, like in Britain, they pay into the apprenticeship levy. It is something that they have to chip into the pot. But unlike Britain's businesses, they can't tap into that and pull out and invest on skills. We know we have a broken skills pipeline, and that just adds to their sense of, I suppose, the structures of government not delivering their aims. So there are plenty. I mean, they're obviously the one that for about 10 years, the only economic policy going around here was, devolve and lower corporation tax. I think that moment has passed for a variety of reasons, but there are plenty of other things like stamp duty, things like landfill tax, other powers. We put this down as an opposition day motion in the last few weeks. And I mean, again, like the executive party interventions weren't that inspiring. Most of them were along the lines of how you framed that. I'm sure we're rubbish at using the powers that we currently have. Don't give us more responsibility. But I suppose it's about saying, if you're going to Gurn about not getting enough from London, and I'll do that with you, and I'll do everything in my power to push those buttons, then start looking at alternatives, start taking control. And for those of us who are actively pursuing a pathway to a new Ireland, it's going to be about looking at a big change like that, and about taking more responsibility ourselves for the pathway ahead. So that's why they're in there. As I say, we didn't pull them out of nowhere. This is a legitimate debate, and in fact, it is building on proposals of the Fiscal Commission that I think members of the current executive commissioned.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just want to pick up on that point, and I don't want to be like the executive parties coming in and saying no more powers, but it does seem to me that you're asking for more taxation to come to Northern Ireland, more taxation power to come to Northern Ireland, but we have got powers over certain aspects of taxation. So our rates, for instance, there's nothing in this document about raising and banding rates, raising the cap and rates and then going to a banding system, which would raise significant capital if we were to do that. There's nothing about water charges in this. So we do have taxation levers that we can pull, but it reads to me in this document like you're very reluctant to do that. So why do you not want to use the levers we have to raise revenue, prove we can do it, and then get income tax and excise and duty and all of those things devolved?
Well, like I say, it's for the executive to set out. I mean, they have those powers by all means, and we have engaged in those. I'm out of the Assembly 5 or 6 years ago now, but when I was first in it, I think in 2017, we were doing a rates review. It didn't go anywhere. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've seen a document in the last, in this, compacted mandate saying that they'll do a rates review in 10 years. That's from a party who say they want a border poll and constitutional change in 5 years, so you can do that faster apparently than you can review the rating system. So we're not opposed to those things, and we don't have the power to initiate.
But why not call
reviews.
for it? You don't have
what we have
the
done,
power to.
what we have done is called for, and I believe, in fact, the Assembly endorsed our motion very recently to initiate a review, for example, of the governance and funding of Northern Ireland Water. There's no point in me racing to a position without full visibility, full transparency of I suppose, the current funding streams and funding pressures. We're up for participating in all of those conversations about how we raise money. But this is, governments and real governments around the world have lots of different powers, and you can the apprenticeship levy is just one. There's a discrete bespoke issue around skills. Businesses are very, very clear about some of the pathways they'd like to create, some of the particularly esteeming pathways that aren't just university. Those funds are being used quite creatively in Britain, and if you look, I think one of the big unlearned lessons of the Republic's financial economic success is that they do have non-university pathways. So this doesn't preclude you doing big and creative things around water, around rates, or anything else. But why not have plenty of strings to your bow? Like I say, it's not a mad idea. I cooked up after a few pints. The Fiscal Commission literally made these recommendations 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, one idea, and just to be positive on something so that I'm not seen as negative all the time, but I really like your idea in the Northern Ireland National Investment Bank, and obviously following the Scottish model, which I think has had some success in Scotland. So how do you see that working in Northern Ireland, and how do you see that playing out? Because I think that's really, to me, was a standout as a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from Scotland's model, and there's also, we have probably more connections to make as well in terms of tapping in to north-south funding as well. We also propose a bit of shared budgeting. There's big figures coming out of the shared island unit, for example, but that is coming sort of from Dublin to, I suppose, their timelines, to their ideas. And in fact, some of those funding streams are often held up because of delays this side of the border, the A5 being an example. So a kind of a shared budgeting approach to that. There's also a conversation to be had with the European Investment Bank. You know that we have been talking in our European future document about much more, taking the post-Brexit conversation beyond just talking about sausages to some of the conversations we can have about tapping into that finance. If you look at, big picture infrastructure things like wind energy and all of the green transition, there is loads of capital around at the moment. There is also money to be made. It's just about, I suppose, coordinating it and getting the lines right.
So it sounds like you're going to support a bridge to Scotland.
Oh well, yeah. I've got a few. I'm all for big picture and big picture ambition. As I said at the time, that was proposed by a prime minister who couldn't build a bridge from London to London, so it was hard to believe in that big vision.
I'm glad we've almost got you on board.
I have a few infrastructure projects that maybe we can get our teeth in and prove the concept before we go tunneling across the sea.
Let me just say, it's great that the SDLP put forward a bunch of ideas. Not sure that the other executive parties will run with them, but for me, the distinguishing factor for the SDLP, and the thing that always attracted me to it, was that it was the party of ideas, the party of proposals that solve problems. Anyhow, I have a completely different kind of question for Claire. Claire mentioned, about building a new Ireland and the constitutional future, and my question goes back to, and we were talking about this earlier, some of the great leaders of the past, but it comes back to Seamus Mallon. Seamus Mallon left a book behind where he very specifically said that the future for Northern Ireland lay in, I guess, reconciliation first before there's constitutional change. And he was very specific. I actually went over the book last night and read a bit of it. And he said that to progress to constitutional change, it did not just require a simple majority of 50% plus one, even though that's what he negotiated in the Good Friday Agreement. He said there would have to be preferably a majority in both communities, parallel consent, but if not, a minimum, and quite specific, a minimum of 40% of unionists should have to vote for constitutional change for it to be able to happen. And I've often wondered, did that go under the radar? Did a lot of the people who got Seamus's book never read it? And I'm just wondering, Claire, where are you on that? If there are negotiations, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey, and thanks for the feedback. You're absolutely right. The SDLP, by the way, is a party of ideas, and we're getting back into the discipline after those crazy years of storming up and down, of putting them out, of writing them down. We put out, I think, 7 policy papers since October, and sometimes it does feel like it falls on deaf ears, but it's important that we are trying to shape the conversation. But on that, and it's an excellent book, and I think it definitely didn't that proposal definitely didn't go under the radar because people talk about it all the time. Although I would take this opportunity to tell people to read the book in its entirety, because it's an incredible piece of work reflecting on his kind of decades of hard yards, and he was really right in there. I mean, the Mallon-Hume partnership is often commented on, but Seamus was duking it out in Market Hill and further afield, and just negotiating complicated relationships all his life. So the book is brilliant. I think that mechanism is, I read it as a bit of a thought exercise about aiming higher than a kind of a constitutional change that just piles up all the nationalists here and all the unionists there, and winner takes it all, and about looking for something that wasn't just a reversing of partition. I think it's very clear consent is the mechanism. It is in the Good Friday Agreement. It is negotiated in there. It is not changing. It is both the only equitable way to do it. Everybody's vote is equal. It's also the only workable way of doing it. There isn't a way to, even if you wanted to do it. And I think the Constitution Unit at LSE did a good piece of work on referendums. There isn't a way to say, as you're going in, and by the way, are you a unionist or a nationalist, just so we can weight your vote? But I think the standard and the aim it sets is laudable, and I'm in the same place on that. That basically the kind of modern pluralist new nation we're trying to put together here isn't won by just slipping past a very narrow win in a period of chaos without people being bought in.
But while there's no doubt that Seamus was trying to point to a more consensual way forward, the 40% number that he locked into in the book, I mean, is that not just effectively a unionist veto forever on constitutional change?
It is, so I respectfully disagree with that as a mechanism. It's definitely where I want to aim, and I think it's I also think it's plausible. I mean, I think if you look even at the voting blocks, there are clearly maybe 25-30% of the electorate who are currently implacably opposed to a New Ireland, and probably a similar numbers who'd vote for it tomorrow if they had to eat grass, kind of thing, and then a softer middle. So I think it's entirely possible to get, if not, brimming with enthusiasm, consent. Certainly people like me, who currently lives and exists and has spent my entire adult life in a constitutional arrangement that isn't exactly how I want it, isn't exactly how I'd design it, but I operate in it and I make it work, and I live my life and I integrate and I cooperate with others because of the principle of consent. And I think there are plenty of people who are, I suppose, a mirror image of me, and I think you can absolutely get to that. But we're crystal clear here. The border poll, the rational mechanism for constitutional change when it happens is very clear. Now, it's also, you'll know my view, that we talk a lot about exactly when that happens and what triggers it and all of that, rather than the pathway, rather than the ways of buying in that wider consent. But a great book, A Shared Home Place, as he beautifully put it. I don't care what you call it, so long as you call it home. And a lot for anybody who's really seriously thinking about how we do this to read.
And Claire, just two final questions for you. Obviously, Michael's brought up, obviously on the front page of the Irish News today, John Manley's reporting your predecessor and chair of the New Ireland Commission columnist was saying that the SDLP and Sinn Féin should work together on border poll. He talked about coming outside, and this is quoted in the Irish News, of coming out a common cause outside of narrow electoral interests. I mean, just where are you as the party leader on that? Are you looking forward to working with Sinn Féin on this?
Well, look, I haven't read that yet, as we've just explained. I've just come over. I think the SDLP is very clear. We're working on the SDLP at the moment, and just setting out our stall and rebuilding our structures as a centre left anti-sectarian New Ireland party. But we're all very clear that this project, this aim is not, cannot, will not be a one party vehicle. Part of what I see is a real asset and an opportunity for the SDLP is our convening power in the Republic in particular, and we are working on a strategy that isn't partnering with any one party, but it's finding and nurturing and supporting and engaging with the people in all the parties across Democratic Ireland who are interested in a new Ireland and are interested in this region and are interested in North-South, because for a variety of reasons, some people, whether in Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, Soc Dems, Greens, some people are really into it and some aren't. And part of our job, part of our strategy is engaging with those who are, and I suppose lobbying and pushing further those who aren't. So that's the strategy, and it's very, very clear. No one party could deliver a project like this, and I don't think. I mean, there are clearly, it's as I say, we look after the SDLP strategy, not anybody else's, not Sinn Féin's, but there are people who probably won't be enthusiastic about the New Ireland idea if they see it as a Sinn Féin project. So there's loads and loads of work to do, plenty of work to go around, let's just say.
Yeah, but you're happy to work with other parties, including Sinn Féin.
Well, we already do work with all parties. Yeah.
Okay, and final question, Claire. Obviously, this week the EU-UK summit happened as well. Now, obviously, the SDLP, very pro-European party. Obviously, would assume you back a close relationship with the EU. But what did you make just of the substance of the deal? Now we're a few days on from it.
Yes, you're not getting a scoop that I don't back further European integration. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much a positive thing. There's probably plenty more to be done, but we produced a paper just before Christmas, Our European Future, that I suppose was trying to just change the conversation around the post-Brexit arrangement, because we were all stuck in the moment. We were in February last year when it was just hyper toxicity and focus just on the movement of goods, and obviously that's really, really important, and reducing friction for businesses and consumers is really important, but there's so much more around just wider horizons for businesses, for young people. So stuff like the youth mobility scheme or youth experience scheme, as I think we're trading it down to, accessing more of those European funds, things like sorting out some of the friction for artists and touring, which had been lost with Brexit. So yeah, look, we're really for it. It will take, unfortunately, a while to work through. It's not a click of the fingers and some of these things drop. And there's more around kind of enhanced voice for Northern Ireland and making sure that we're able to engage. But really, really pleased to see it. Of course, the simpler way to have full participation in European structures, and as I say, all that goes with it, is through a new Ireland. But I appreciate that's a while off. But yeah, it's a positive. And I must say, what struck me on Monday, as it was going through, it was just how, frankly, petty a lot of the kind of decade of quibbling about who gets to decide the phytosanitary rules. We're in a changed and changing world, and we organise in blocks, and there are big, bad, scary threats out there, from Trump to climate and everything in between. So cooperation, and I think we lost so many mad years where international cooperation and pooling sovereignty was framed as something terrible, and I think that is a step away from that worldview, and that's positive.
Brilliant. Claire, thank you so much for being very generous with your time. So that's SDLP leader Claire Hanna. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so that was our first party leader on the podcast, by the way, we should say. So I'll start with you, Tim. What did you make of Claire's? I mean, obviously you and her had a bit of chat about revenue raising. I mean, what did you make of what she was saying about that?
I think it's the opposition. This is what I was trying to tease out of her, and she did duck it a little bit and put that back on the executive parties. she's right that the opposition here, and she outlined it very well, the opposition here does not have the power or the scope that the opposition would have in, say, Holyrood or at Westminster. The opposition aren't saying we're the alternative, replace them with us. But I do think that the opposition here, it's incumbent upon them to start to float at least ideas, to float balloons, to do that sort of forward long-term thinking. And she kind of ducked that a little bit, I think, on these revenue raising powers. She put that back to the executive. Now, in their document, they actually do have that long-term thinking within the document, the Future Generations Act that they propose. That's about long-term policy thinking and allowing the executive to have long-term policy thinking. She put that, they do have that in the document, and they do have this, Northern Ireland National Investment Bank in their document, which allows that long-term strategic infrastructure planning. And so they are proposing that, but I think in this revenue reform that they want, I think they would have a little bit more credibility if they said, look, we have got to reform the levers that we have. We have got to remove the cap on rates, and we've got to go to banding. Don't wait for the executive to do a review. Come out and say, this is the review you should have done. This is the starting point that you should come from. And I think just throwing that back to the executive is a little bit of a weakness in what the SDLP are proposing, because the rest of the document is very strong in that long-term planning, which the executive have ducked for quite some time. We haven't had long-term planning on policy terms in the executive since the Delivering Social Change initiatives, which started in 2011 and sadly came to an end in 2015. So to make those proposals the right proposals, I think they just need to be braver and go a little bit further.
Okay, Michael, what did you make of her responses?
Well, as I admitted at the outset, I'm something of a fan. I think she's a very impressive politician. And, I think she's quite a track record behind her, but an even bigger future in front of her, I think. Yes, she answered the questions. Tim's right. The SDLP document, like the documents that it kind of criticises, is largely aspirational. There's not a lot of hard targets or numbers in it either. But nonetheless, I think she defended it pretty well. I also think her remarks in relation to constitutional change were pretty clear, and she got rid of that Seamus Mallon thing that's been overhanging the SDLP.
Although, and I appreciate it only happened the other. Although I appreciate, Michael, it only happened the other night though. Whenever the front page of the Irish News today, Colm Eastwood's comments about Sinn Féin and the SDLP working together, I detected maybe not the same enthusiasm. Maybe that
certainly wasn't wholehearted.
If I'd put that Seamus Mallon proposition to Colm Eastwood and said, what do you think of this 40% figure of unions have to agree to any change, I think the air would have been filled with a lot of unsavoury language, and he might have, and even though he was a good friend of Mallon's, I think he would disown it completely. Whereas Claire nuances it a little bit about how it's generous and how it's kind of consensual and all of that, but at the same time she arrives in the same conclusion.
Well, look, I've always said that the difference between Colm Eastwood and Claire Hanna, the two top performers in the SDLP, has been, for Colm, he's a nationalist first, Social Democrat second. For Claire, it's the opposite way around, Social Democrat first, nationalist second. I also just think it's the different constituencies they represent. Colm, of course, is up in Foyle, right on the border in Derry. Claire's in South Belfast and Mid-Down.
No, I think that's right.
Again, totally different dynamic. But it was great. But it was great.
Well, she did say that when she was talking to us just a few minutes ago. She was saying that she wants to position the SDLP party as that sort of centre-left alternative. And I think in South Belfast, that's certainly what she's been trying to do, and it's why I think a number of unionists vote for Claire as well, and also for her stance in the European Union, which we teased out as well. And it was also good. It was also good that she was a maybe on the bridge to Scotland. So I think that's.
And look, and you can understand that play, because she has been the only SDLP politician in the last 10 years who has a proven record of stopping votes going from the SDLP to the Alliance Party. Only in South Belfast has she held back the Alliance Party. It's only there can she claim, Kate Nicholl, Paula Bradshaw haven't been able to touch her in terms of Westminster. She's won twice now with big majorities as well. Okay, Thanks very much, gents, for going around the houses with me. Thanks also to Claire Hanna, SDLP leader, for coming on the podcast. You two are dreadfully wrong on compulsory voting. You have to turn up here next week. That is compulsory, even though you like voluntary things. But anyway, we want to hear your questions and your comments every week. I promise you, we do read them, no matter how offensive they are. We actually do read them. So please do get in touch. And we've got a variety of different ways in which you can get in touch with us. You can send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. You can also send us a WhatsApp, 0333 404 6507. Don't forget to like and subscribe us on YouTube and also on your nearest podcast channels. For Tim, Michael, and myself, that's all we have time for this week. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you then.